Here we're going to talk a little bit about gender identity and personality. And we'll focus on gender differences and sex roles, gender identity, gender and hormones. So think for a little bit. You don't need to journal on this, but think about the ways in which you might have been raised as a girl or a boy, how it shaped you. What if it had been the opposite? What if you would have been raised as a boy if you're a woman, or what if you had been raised as a girl if you're a guy? Would it change how you feel about your gender? Would it change your experience, your subjective experience of being male or female? So we do find that a couple of different incidents I'll give you here. So the first image, the black and white image of the children at the table, is describing children in kibbutzes, which are these communal areas in Israel where most of the child rearing is done collectively. And the children are raised communally, and they don't treat girls and boys any differently. So whether you're a girl or a boy, you're asked to do the very same things. And they found that despite that, the girls in this particular, the girls who were studied for this particular paper were liable to prefer games, children's games that involved that kind of play, playing with, dolls or home care kinds of things, even though they hadn't been treated differently, which does suggest something of a nature effect. And there's an example, an article that I'll post up for you in case you're interested, but it's about how some families in Afghanistan, where girls have no rights at all, they can't get an education, they're treated very differently, especially now under the Taliban. It's worse, they have to remain covered. And there are some instances of families deciding to raise their girls as boys, like just claim them as boys and identify them in school and enter them in everything as boys. And interestingly, and these are three sisters, but one of them was raised as a boy so that there would be some opportunity. And indeed, in this instance, the girls raised as boys definitely developed more male typical preferences, even more aggressive play in sports and things like that. On the other hand, this is the Reimer case that I had mentioned to you, and I'm not going to play it because it's in a separate video and it won't come onto the YouTube anyhow. So this is the case as a boy who was accidentally circumcised and then transformed into a girl with the idea that it was all about how you were raised, and that's the only reason genders felt differently, which proved to be definitively false, and that young man had killed himself in his middle adulthood when he was in his 30s, I believe. Because he had a twin brother, he becomes a particularly interesting case, and we'll discuss it briefly in class. And so we can think about how sex roles still play out. I put a scenario here in which imagine you're in an office or something, it's the end of the workday, and one of your colleagues walks back in the office. She's got her young child, she's shivering, she's a little distraught, she's got to take the child to an appointment, but she has a flat tire and she can't manage with the child in the rain. In what ways are people likely to offer help? So maybe a man and a woman get up to help, but most likely it's going to be the guy who goes out in the rain to fix the tire and the woman who takes the child hand and helps that both people get comfortable. It's not always the case, but we still do have these sex roles. And we've talked earlier about the importance of this dynamic balance in our world and that there's a place for it. But this is simply to acknowledge that we still do have the existence of these sex roles that we seem to fall into pretty naturally. So let's talk about these stereotypes and gender differences a little bit. So first of all, we talk about sex as those physical characteristics that male and female bodies have, whereas gender is like the whole package, the whole psychological, behavior, cultural, social, psychological. It's like masculinity or femininity, the whole package of being male or female. And gender identity is how a person feels, regardless of how they're treated or what their body is. So that's what gender identity is. Sexual orientation is one's enduring sexual attraction to male, female, or both kinds of partners. And you know that we have a number of different kinds of orientation and identities in this day. Sex roles are the attitudes and behaviors towards male and females in a particular society. Transgender, a person whose gender identity doesn't match their physical sex, that is, they're having gender dysphoria, they don't feel right in their own body. If they're in a female body, they definitively feel male, and vice versa. And then transsexual is someone who's already become transforming their body with the use of hormones. And so stereotypes then are these generalized beliefs about the characteristics of males and females. And they're oversimplified and overgeneralized, and they're stereotypes because people forget to see an individual and apply the stereotype. Examples: women are dependent, emotional, weak, indecisive, unpredictable, bad at math, good with babies, talkative, good listeners. I think we all know some women who fit these characteristics, or some of these characteristics, and some who don't. And on the opposite end, men are strong, solid, rational, decisive, mathematical, and spatially strong. They don't get lost. They're unemotional. They don't do well in socially demanding situations. They're uncomfortable with babies and children. And these are stereotypes of what a male is. And of course, we know males who don't fit some or all of these characteristics. This old nursery rhyme, what are little boys made of? Snips and snails and puppy dog tails. What are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and everything nice. And there's some certain pressure to be that way. We saw this a little bit in the election a couple cycles back when Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump. And if she did anything that seemed masculine-ish, that is, she was maybe assertive, or she didn't have that sugary voice, she was disparaged in a way that a male candidate wasn't. And so there's definitely like expectations, even if we don't want to believe that these are true, that we want to believe that everything is pretty equal, but there are still these kind of roles that we put people into, for better, for whatever it is, it's just the reality. These are stereotypes. So we know that there's a lot of overlap. I don't have my pen out right now, but whenever we look at differences between male and females, we're always looking at averages. And if you can think back to your stats class, you can picture this distribution, and you can picture that there's a lot of overlap if we put a male and female in there. So male and female have, of course, physical differences. On average, females are constitutionally, their bodies are stronger than males in infancy and adulthood. So male infants are more vulnerable to disease, for some reasons linked to the Y chromosome, the absence of a second X chromosome, but they're also more vulnerable. Males are more likely to die than females. And masculine men and masculine women actually live shorter lives on average than feminine men and feminine women. So the traits, maybe the competitiveness, the drive, the libido that makes a person more masculine, it actually shortens the lifespan. And we know there are academic differences on average. On average, thinking about the distribution that I didn't quite get to show you, females have a verbal advantage and males have a spatial advantage. Girls talk earlier, larger vocabularies, higher grades in school, better in reading and writing, whereas boys have stronger spatial ability, math ability. They tend to know more about geography and politics than females. So we have these differences. Socially, there are differences in contributions. On average, social differences exist in aggressiveness, competitiveness, and caregiving. Males are more likely to be violent, more likely to take over in small group situations, like talk a lot, state their positions directly, tend to say things like, say things as if they're truths. And that's as opposed to a more female way or feminine way of saying things, which would be to say, well, do you think that? Or, what do you think about this idea? So a different way of stating things that tends to either dominate or take a more subservient role in group situations, regardless of understanding of the content. Men are more likely to take credit for things. It's harder for women to do that. Women are more likely to generalize and give credit to the group. Men are more likely to be assertive, like request a raise. This is a very hard thing for many women to do, to go in and say, these are the things I've done. This is why I deserve a raise. Very difficult for women. Men are likely to embrace competition. And lastly, that what I mentioned with Hillary Clinton, to be perceived favorably for demonstrating these traits. Women are more likely to be concerned with the child, with the children, with the child rearing, with the school, the teacher interactions, the child's feelings, emotions, experiences. Women are more likely to give credit to other people, to state their views indirectly in a way that seeks to bring everyone into the idea in a cooperative way, to not be assertive, and if they are assertive, to be perceived unfavorably if they act in that more masculine way. Now, as we know, I will show you that distribution, but considerable overlap exists. So we're talking about mean differences, which means that there's a lot of overlap. Biological differences we'll talk about in that other lecture, but we do have prenatal and postnatal hormones that contribute to innate patterns. We do have socialization differences. Society tends to reward males for masculine behavior and reward females for feminine behavior, and to punish out-of-role behaviors. And there are differences in opportunity. Males and females have different financial and career opportunities. Even though we've made progress, there's still limits. And stereotypes affect how we perceive male and females, and you maybe are familiar with stereotype threat. It impacts even performance of male and females. So sex roles are these coded behaviors related to a person's reproductive capacities. Women given the role of motherhood and men with fatherhood, and those are different roles. And these expectations shape people. Limiting potentials in non-sex role specific activities like women in engineering, that's more challenging, or men seeking to be a preschool teacher, that's more challenging, it's unusual, maybe a little harder. And so this week you're going to be taking a couple of inventories to measure your own sex role adherence. How much do you adhere to your sex role? Kind of dated scales, but we'll be looking at them. So this one is the BEM sex role inventory created by Sarah Bem. She was measuring androgyny, which is the andro meaning masculine, gyne meaning female, feminine. And so how much does a person have both characteristics? And this is way back, man, a long time ago, 1974. And in this couple of studies using, sometimes larger samples, we found that masculine and feminine traits were identified. So they surveyed all these undergrads to find out they asked them to rate all these traits on how socially desirable they were for males and for females. And then they normed it on with a whole much bigger sample. So these ways that people think about male and female, that's what they were looking for, traits that people tended to think defined masculinity and femininity. And so if people were androgynous, they had both masculine and feminine characteristics. That means they scored high in both categories. So that's the kind of score that you'll get. And if you are more sex type, more masculine or more feminine, then you're going to score above the median in one gender and below the median in the other. And so these are the words. This is what the scale looks like. And the question is this: how desirable is it in American society for a man or woman, depending on who you are, to possess each of these characteristics? And so people are asked to rate: self-reliant, man or woman, never, rarely, neutral, often, always, yielding, who's supposed to yield, who's supposed to give in, helpful, defends their own beliefs. So we'll talk about these terms a little bit more in class. This is the scale you'll be taking this week. Now, we do ask if gender roles have changed since 1974, and in 1997, which is still a long time ago now, changes weren't as loud as might be expected. Masculine adjectives were still rated as more desirable. than feminine adjectives, which is a travesty because we need both. I think that's where our society goes awry. Feminine adjectives were still rated as more desirable for a woman than for a man. The differences were greater, way back then, but they were still present. But one of the limitations is that these were students attending a small southern university, and in the southeast, which is where this took place, there definitely are more stereotyped roles for males and females. It's like a culture that espouses those roles. So it might differ if we're in a more urban area. Oh, and who knows what it will be here on the Navajo Nation. So that's what we have for right now. Thank you.